All right, guys, we're back today with another video. Today, we are discussing the Civil War and really going to look specifically at what were some of the advantages and disadvantages that the North or the South one enjoyed. So, the very first thing that we're going to do here is take a look at how the country shapes up. You can see there the dark blue is the Union, that's the North. The red is the South, that's the Confederacy. But then we've got those light blue states, and those are what we would kind of refer to as the border states. Now, the border states were with the Union, but they were slaveholding states. So things were not as nice and neat as they often maybe were led to believe, right? Things are always far more complicated. What that means is that they were loyal to the Union, but because they had slaves, Lincoln is going to have to walk a really, really fine line. If he does anything that really kind of pushes those states away, causes them to secede, then the North could be in a lot of trouble. Not only because they're losing these very important states, but Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, the capital of the Union, is on the border of Virginia and Maryland. If Maryland goes because they get upset about what he does over slavery, then our capital is in enemy territory. It's in the Confederacy. There are serious problems with that, right? This could tip the scale. This could tip the balance pretty dangerously if he doesn't walk a very, very fine line. Now, with that said, let's take a look at what are some of the advantages and disadvantages. You can create something like this, although you don't have to, but this is just a really quick chart. What the North, the South along the top there, and the advantages and the disadvantages. So if you're taking notes at home, if this is something that you're doing for school, then go ahead and do that. It might be very useful to you. The first thing that we're going to see is we're going to take a look at the North. Anything that's an advantage for the North is almost inherently a disadvantage for the South. Because they were so divergent, because they were so different and opposite one another, that holds fairly true. So we're going to take a look here. The very first thing that the North holds an advantage over is in industry. Now, we know that, right? We've studied that. We know that moving up to this, the North and their economy was quickly industrializing. So they are producing the manufactured products. And so that's a big benefit to them because they're able to manufacture things like guns and fabric for tents, right? Nice thick canvas, boots and shoes and cannons. I mean, you name it, all the things that are going to be manufactured almost entirely, it's going to come out of the North. The South does not have that. So that's something you can put in the North's advantage box, and a disadvantage would be a lack of industry in the South. Big time advantage. Wars are won in a lot of different ways, but one of the universal things is you have to provide for your soldiers. You cannot fight a war. You cannot expect to win a war when you're not equipping your soldiers appropriately. And the North has the ability to provide and equip their soldiers. Now, the next thing that we're going to see is agriculture. I think a lot of people think of the South as being largely agricultural, and it was, but the North's agriculture is unique in a different way. We're not producing cotton, we're actually producing food, which is pretty important if you want to feed your population and feed your military. You can't live off cotton, right? And so the South is producing a cash crop with almost every available square inch of land that does them no good in terms of filling their bellies. So the North, it's small farmers, right? It's not large plantations, but they're producing livestock, hogs and chickens and cattle. You're also seeing row crops, corn and beans and you name it, right? All the produce. And so that really is an advantage for the North. The South is not producing food in large quantities, certainly not enough. Because we had been one country, obviously, just not that long ago, the South was producing cotton, which was very useful, but it was useful as an export. And so they're sending it up north in order to allow the industries to manufacture textiles. Likewise, the North is producing food, and they're sending it to the South. So there's a lot of trade between the states going on. That's going to come to a screeching halt. And now we're not going to really be producing food for export for them because that would strengthen our enemy. That would strengthen the Confederacy, and we don't want to do that. So our food is going to stay in the North, and they can do their best to swallow their cotton. Next thing, major advantage in the North is population. We have a massive population. In fact, I'm going to zoom in here on, this is the population density in 1860. And so it shows you roughly how many people there are per square mile, but the darker the color, obviously the more densely populated it is. And so what we can see is that the North is almost entirely far more densely populated than the South. That's going to translate into a larger number of soldiers, right? If there are more people, then you have more opportunity for fighting age males to join the military. So we not only have a larger population, we have a larger fighting aged male population. And so that's going to translate not only into population, but into the number of available soldiers. That's a very big deal, right? A very big deal. Now, we also have an established government. Right? Washington, D.C., we have an established government. So our Senate and our House of Representatives and the state governments, right, they're all kind of running more or less smoothly, right? They've been at it for a while now. Whereas the South, having just split apart, they may have established state governments, but there's no structure around a national federal government. And so they're in this situation where they're having to, if they want to be an independent country, and that's what they're fighting for, right? If they want to be an independent country, then they have to not only fight a war, but they have to fight a war while trying to establish a government with any credibility, establish a government and create laws, establish a government and fight a war and create laws, and establish credibility and raise taxes to fund your military. There's a lot of different things that you need your government for. And while the North already has it well established, the South is going to really struggle with that. So having an established government is a big, big advantage. Next, we're going to see that the United States, or at least the Union, has a Navy, right? We had a Navy. The South does not. Now, the South is going to establish one. It's not very big. It certainly is not as powerful as the Navy of the Union, but this is going to play a critical role. The South, they've got some serious territory. They've got some things in their column, but the reality is there's a lot of coastline, and they depend upon shipping. They depend upon exports, exporting their cotton and importing now manufactured goods. And with a navy that can go anywhere along that large coastline, it's going to make it very, very difficult for the South. Very difficult. So we'll see that come to play in another video. Go ahead and watch the one on Vicksburg and the Anaconda Plan, because the Navy plays a big role in that. All right. Now we're going to talk about the causes. Is that an advantage for the North? I think a lot of people think that that's an advantage for the North because, well, we're fighting for the right cause. We have this, sense of duty and all these different kinds of things, right? We're fighting for what's right. And while that's true, it's not entirely true, because the war was fought really to preserve the Union. It was not fought to free the slaves. And if you want proof of that, ask Abraham Lincoln, because he admits himself that his first and foremost priority was to preserve the Union. Now, would he love to free the slaves? Yes, he personally was an abolitionist. He hated the idea of slavery. But his job as president was to hold the country together. And so that was his first and foremost priority. So is that a big enough cause? Well, maybe. Now, if you asked other people, right, individual soldiers, individual families, some of them were about preserving the Union. Others were very much about the cause of abolition and the ending of slavery. And so you have this weird mishmash of people and ideas in the North that are fighting for different reasons. Some it's to preserve the Union, some it's to free slavery, some aren't even supportive of the thing. We've really oversimplified the Civil War in an effort to make it understandable for younger children and whatnot, but it's far more complex than most people realize. Not everybody in the North was for freeing the slaves. Not everybody in the South was for keeping slavery. The vast majority, yes, but even those in the North that were for abolition, that didn't mean that they were, not racist. There was still a large degree of racism. There's a big difference between believing that owning another human being is wrong and not believing that you and your race are somehow better than others. So there's still a large degree of racism in the North. But anyway, we're talking about generalizations now. Now, let's go ahead and shift gears. We're going to take a look at the South. What can we put in their column? By the way, that wasn't all of the advantages of the North. That's just a few of the really big ones. And of course, there are going to be more. The South doesn't have a whole lot to hang its hat on. It really doesn't. One of the things that we look at is, well, they have generals. While we have a larger army, while we have an established government, while we have a navy, What we don't have in the North is well established generals. A lot of the states of the South had kind of native sons that had gone into the military and had established themselves and had worked their way up into the upper ranks. So many of the most heralded generals, the most famous and really most effective generals, were on the side of the South. In the South, military service is really something that people take great pride in, and it's multi generational. And it can be that way in the North as well, but I think in many cases it was much more deeply ingrained in the South. And so they've produced a leadership, right? A great number of generals. And we see that they really take their one major advantage, and they're able to utilize that to great effect, to the point where for the first couple of years of the war, they're actually winning because their leadership is better. It's a huge problem when you don't have leaders at the top that understand how to wage a war. Now, just like we talked about with the North, what about the cause? Because I think a lot of people don't think that the South had a cause to fight for, right? But that's not true, right? For them, they had not one cause, they had many causes. Some people were very much invested in the idea of the expansion of slavery and holding on to slavery. Now, today, we would obviously look at that and go, well, yeah, that's not the right cause. That's not a moral cause. But to them, it really was, right? In their way of thinking at that time, they felt like that this was right, and anything other than this. And again, I'm not talking about all the people of the South, but there were certainly those in the South who had convinced themselves of this and believed this, kind of adopting it as their truth. What can you do, right? So for some people, they are absolutely fighting to maintain slavery. But we oversimplify it if we say it's only about that. It was all about slavery, but it was also all about states' rights. There were many people who didn't care at all about the issue of slavery. What they cared about was Washington, D.C., the federal government dictating to individual states what they could and could not do. For them, it was an issue of freedom, a freedom for a state to decide for itself. For the longest time, states had operated in many ways like independent countries. And now the federal government is going to dictate from its high and lofty perch, right, what you can and can't do. For some, it was about slavery. For some, it was about states' rights. For others, it was about the economy. They recognized that the loss of slavery means the loss of cotton. That entire industry is built upon the backs of slaves. And so maybe they didn't care that much about slaves. Maybe they didn't care that much about states' rights. But there were people who could look at this and go, this is going to devastate our economy. What will we do when our one major industry is threatened and destroyed? And so there are people that are looking at this war in very different lenses. Yes, it was about slavery. Yes, it was about states' rights. Yes, it was about the economy. And yes, it's about culture. When you threaten someone's way of life, when you threaten the way things have always been done, then people are going to kind of get up in arms about things. Go ahead and try to change the way things are done in any established organization, and you will find people fighting tooth and nail. Some of that other stuff maybe didn't matter to them, but this was what they knew. It was what they had grown up with. It's what their parents before them had grown up with. And so there's a great fear sometimes in changing. Again, I'm not saying that any of these things are a justifiable reason to maintain slavery. I'm just trying to point out that from their perspective in history, they were fighting for much more than just slavery. Some people weren't fighting for slavery at all. They were fighting for their culture. They were fighting for their economy. They were fighting for their states' rights. Now, I will say this. One thing that I didn't put on the slide is that the South did have a knowledge of the terrain. Most of the war is going to be fought on southern states' soil. And so, in many cases, they kind of get to choose the battlefield. They get to set up their battlements, and they get to dig in, and they know the terrain in those areas. So that is a slight advantage. I don't know how much. I think I would rather have an established economy, an established government, an established navy. A larger population. There are things that I'd rather have, and that certainly points to the North. Now, let me zoom in on this because I want to show you these are some of the things in a chart form that we can see. When it comes to population, 71% of the entire population was in the North. And so again, that's going to translate into a higher number of soldiers. Bank deposits. This deals with the economy and where is the wealth, where is the money. 81% of all bank deposits are going to be in the North. Factories, we talked about the fact that industry was such an important role, and 86% of the factories were in the North. Now, cotton, yes, the South has 99.9% of cotton, but what good does that do you if you can't export it? What good does that do you if you can't eat it? So, while yes, they have an advantage here, and they were going to try and turn that into an advantage in the war, it's going to be a very difficult thing to do. Food crops, 72% of all the food crops were going to be in the North. Now, there we've got horses, donkeys, and mules for whatever purpose that serves. I mean, they're beasts of burden, so you can use them, I suppose, to move goods around. The South has the advantage on donkeys and mules, the North on horses. I think that's probably a wash. But here, if we're talking about moving things around, whether it be troops or food or supplies or ammunition, whatever it may be, the bulk of the railroads were also in the North. And that meant that we could move things from where they were being manufactured and processed or where soldiers were being trained down to a southern front, just about anywhere, and we could do it with ease. So I've got another one here that I think is pretty interesting as well. This shows workers, right? Workers, 1.3 million in the North to 130,000 in the South. And so, in terms of being able to produce the goods necessary to fight the war, and then look here, 18,000 factories in the South, where we have over 1 million factories in the North. It's just a dramatic difference. What else? Value of goods purchased or processed here. You can see everything points to the North. This is an interesting one here because it's firearms. We're producing firearms at a ratio of 12 to 1. So I don't know about you, but if I'm going to be in a war, I want to be on the side that can bury its enemy in a mountain of weapons. And so that's what we're doing. Which side would you choose? If you could pick the advantages, I think most thinking people would choose the North. The South has a long road to hoe, right? This is going to be a very difficult thing for the South. Now, there are advantages that they do have. Again, those generals, it makes a pretty significant deal for the South. And we'll see how that comes into play in a future video. Right now, though, I think that we can all agree that the North has the dramatic advantage. And the North knew it. Maybe one of the advantages for the South is that the North saw the advantages that they had, and it caused them to be overconfident. So anyway, with that said, guys, go ahead and watch the Vicksburg and Anaconda video that I've got coming up. I'll be posting that here in the next day or so. And feel free to subscribe, like the video, and leave me any comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.